What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Kingdom Crew podcast. I am your host, Josh Fan, joined by my co host, as always, Michael Darcy of KC Sports Report. We're back for the second episode of Kingdom Crew for the 2023 Kansas City Chiefs season. And today we are going to be going over everything new going on with the Chiefs right now. Michael has been sick for a while now, and he's been down for the count. So he hasn't really, we haven't heard from him on a lot of stuff that's happened. A lot has happened since the last time he was on. And then we're going to go ahead and preview this Jacksonville Jaguars game in week 2 for the Kansas City Chiefs. But first of all, Michael, how are you doing today?
Josh, I've basically been in hibernation mode for the last week. I think over a 3-day span, I slept 36 hours. So it's good to be back talking to the people, talking about the Kansas City Chiefs. A lot of stuff's happened in my absence, but I'm excited to talk about it and definitely, get back together because so much has happened. And it's not just trivial stuff. It's big news we've been waiting all offseason for. So it's definitely going to be a good episode, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, and I think it's only appropriate that we open up the episode talking about the biggest news over this past week, and that is Chris Jones returning to the Kansas City Chiefs on a reworked 1-year deal. He will be back on the field. He will presumably play against the Jacksonville Jaguars this week. They haven't really said whether or not he's playing definitively, and he was limited at practice this week, but I feel like he's probably going to play. He'll probably be out there. How much? I don't know. That can be debated, but Chris Jones is back. And I said this, Michael, when I made my video on it a couple days ago. I'm just glad the drama is over. Is it the resolution that everybody wanted? Probably not. There was no long-term deal that got done, but I'm just happy to have Chris Jones back on the field as soon as possible. This got that done. And I had a lot of people hitting me up after the signing or after the reworked contract. And they were like, oh, I thought you said Chris Jones had leverage. Or this probably means he didn't have leverage. And I don't think it means that, because I think Chris Jones definitely had leverage throughout this entire thing. Again, how much can be debated, but he certainly had leverage throughout this debacle. And I feel like this deal got done because the Chiefs are like, okay, Chris, we're not getting anything done long term. That's obvious at this point. But what can we do to get you back on the field for this year? There was a level of desperation from the Chiefs to get Chris Jones back with the team. And this is the resolution that they came to. They gave him a new rework deal that has the same base salary, but could earn him more incentives based on accolades and statistics. So I'm just glad to have Chris Jones back, man. I mean, it was really hard to see this team repeating in 2023 without Chris Jones. And with the whole Kelce drama going on and his injury, and we'll kind of touch on that a little bit later. It was very important to get one of your best players back, and Chris Jones is certainly that. So those were my initial thoughts. But Michael, I'd love to hear from you since it's been a while since we've heard from you with everything that's going on.
So I've had a lot of time to sleep on this, quite literally. It's interesting that this is where we're at in the Chris Jones saga. Like you said, I'm glad that it's over. We're not going to have to, read the Twitter timeline of what's Chris Jones thinking on this certain day. He's going to be on the Kansas City Chiefs for this season. That's a good thing. But Chris Jones, the entire offseason, was very adamant about getting something in terms of long-term security. And that did not get accomplished with this reworked 1-year deal. It really didn't do anything. I guess you get more money and incentives if you hit those incentives. But even then, you're only going to make an additional $6-7 million when you were eyeing making tens of millions of dollars more in the future this offseason. So I'm kind of confused how Chris Jones went from I'm not playing until I get long-term security to I guess I'll take this tiny bump up in salary for a 1-year deal. I guess both sides were okay with it. And Chris Jones is like, you know what? I want to get paid. And I think this is a fair deal. But I also don't think this accomplished anything in terms of the long-term security for either party, because when I see that the Chiefs were not able to come to an agreement with him, I'm glad that he's on the team for this season. But him signing a 1-year deal when he's been preaching long-term contract extension basically all offseason, this 1-year rework deal kind of seems like the final dance for Chris Jones. And I don't want to think like that because we have to live in the present. But I think the Chiefs kind of made it clear that the writing's on the wall. And, come back for this final season. We'll give you a little bit of a upgrade in salary. But when it comes to long-term stuff, we're not going to do that. And I think that's concerning, but that's me thinking into the future. Right now, Chris Jones is going to be on this team in week 2, and that's a good thing. But for 2024 and beyond, I think none of what we saw this past week answered any of those questions.
Yeah, you're certainly correct. Um, it's uncertain what Chris Jones's future is in Kansas City. It did kind of feel like when they came to this resolution that this could be the last dance for Chris Jones with the Kansas City Chiefs, like you mentioned. This could be the last dance for the Kelce, Jones, Mahomes core. And it's sad to think about, but it's hard not to think about too, because like a lot of people are saying, guys, we got a season to play. Like Chris Jones isn't gone yet. Because look, this could very well set up a long-term extension in the offseason. But this also increases the likelihood that Chris Jones hits the open market or the Chiefs tag and trade him. Now, you mentioned Chris Jones, you don't know what it accomplished by signing this one-year deal when he was holding out for this big money. And when I look at it from Chris Jones' perspective, I feel like what happened was he was never going to. So the long-term deal that the Chiefs were offering was not enough for him. And while this reworked one-year deal is also not what he wanted, it gives him the opportunity to cash in next offseason with a different team if the Chiefs aren't going to pay him that. The Chiefs could tag him. Now, that was something we were waiting to see in the contract details, if there was like a no tag clause or anything like that. There's not. The Kansas City Chiefs can still tag Chris Jones this offseason. And so that would allow them to find a trade partner, maybe get some compensation for Chris Jones, or Chris Jones just hits the open market and they let him walk, which I really can't see that happening. It just like, you got to get something for Chris Jones, man. Like he's not going to be on your team. You got to get something for him. So I don't see that happening. And look, it's not impossible that they come up with a long-term extension in the offseason. Like it's happened before with guys in contract years. They come to an agreement, just hours before free agency, and that player remains with the team. That could still very well happen. All options are still on the table with Chris Jones. This reworked one-year deal just makes it to where he's back on the field for right now. And then they can worry about it later. They're kicking the can down the road.
I just get worried because the Chiefs have shown in the past, at least in the Brett Veach era, that when they kick that can down the road, they never end up, picking it up and signing anybody. It's always, we'll kick the can down the road and then we'll franchise tag you and trade you kind of thing. So I think the Chiefs would be absolutely foolish not franchise tag Chris Jones next offseason. They're going to. If I was to put money down on it, I definitely would. They're going to franchise tag Chris Jones and try to come up with a long-term deal. But let's just say hypothetically, Chris Jones becomes a defensive player of the year this year. He wins that thing. He's gone. Are you kidding me? What he's going to ask for? He's going to ask for the Nick Bosa money. And the Chiefs cannot do that. They could not do that, even if they wanted to. So, that's kind of what you get for putting it off for as long as you have. And I understand that it's the business and the Chiefs have to do what's smart. But I just think that, this 1-year rework deal is the final ride that we have with Chris Jones, just because nothing that I've seen Brett Veach do in his tenure leads me to believe that, you weren't worth paying that much back then, but, a year later, you're worth paying now, especially because the Chiefs are coming off of a Super Bowl victory. So I don't really know how much more Chris Jones could do to force the Chiefs to pay him all this money. You know what I mean? I feel like a year later from now, I almost think the Chiefs are going to be in a worse position in terms of what they're willing to give.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, though, about Chris Jones. Like, if he were to have a really good season, like Defensive Player of the Year caliber season, and he wins that thing, then he could realistically ask for more, and he wouldn't be wrong for doing that. And then it's like, well, he'll be a year older now. You didn't sign him to the extension, and it's like, it seems like Chris Jones wanted about $30 million during negotiations. The Chiefs weren't going to give him $30 million. And then Chris Jones is going to play into being worth $31, $32 million. And then it's like, well, if you didn't do $30 million then, why would you do $31, $32 million now? You get what I'm saying?
They just wouldn't. And so you're just there's a reason why being cautious and addressing things later on in the future instead of addressing them when they first arise is problematic. And this is the situation where it's problematic because Chris Jones, the stock's only probably going to go up. And so if the Chiefs aren't willing to pay him $30 million now, they're definitely not going to give him 32 next year when he's a year older and the Chiefs have more cap issues.
Yeah, it's just not like them. Well, and then also another thing is to make sure that Chris Jones's contract actually fit under their cap now. They had to restructure Joe Tooney's contract, and now they have made Joe Tooney's cap number bigger for the next 2 years. I want to say he's making like 27, or he's like a $27 million cap hit, somewhere around there. I could be wrong. I really should have it pulled up in front of me, but I don't. But he gets a lot more expensive now.
Yeah.
And that's one of the consequences of signing him to that contract and then wanting to keep a player like Chris Jones. And then it's like we've seen in the past, the Chiefs usually have a line in the sand. They're not willing to cross it, and they'll just trade you. Like they did it with Tyreek Hill. Now, we've talked about before how the Chris Jones situation is different from the Tyreek Hill situation. But if they end up trading Chris Jones, tagging and trading him in the offseason, so be it. They save some money doing that. And also, at least that way, if that's the direction that they decided to go, they can get assets back for Chris Jones. They could go and sign a free agent to make up for his loss. They could draft a defensive tackle in the draft. They would have prepared for it. One of our biggest things that we were shouting this year
Yes.
or this offseason was that you guys are pretending that the Chiefs don't need Chris Jones when they did nothing to prepare for his absence.
Yeah, that's a perfect point because the Chiefs and Brett Veach know now that, Chris Jones, there's like a 60-40 chance that he doesn't come back. And that allows Brett Veach to say, you know what would this team give for Chris Jones? And he can kind of play, that side of the market, and he can start preparing better for a life without Chris Jones. If Chris Jones, didn't end up coming back this season, I think that really caught the Chiefs front office by surprise. They were not expecting that kind of a holdout, but now they know. And so they can prepare accordingly for Chris Jones not being on this team. And you can franchise tag him next offseason, flip him for some assets, and, get his replacement in the draft. That's the kind of luxury that the Chiefs did not have this past offseason because Chris Jones kind of defied some of the odds and they just weren't preparing for that. So, like you said, now they're going to have a better idea or can at least plan for a life without Chris Jones. And that'll at least give us more comfort going into next season, knowing that at least they planned for Chris Jones not being on this team and not, oh, shoot, Chris Jones isn't on this team. What are we going to do? And they scramble to sign some 30-something defensive tackle that, can't rush the quarterback.
Yeah, I agree with everything. So, with that being said, let's break down the impact of Chris Jones returning to the football field for the Kansas City Chiefs. Even if he plays minimally in week 2 versus the Jaguars, if he's out there for 30% of the snaps, that's absolutely massive. Just his presence alone, even if he's not getting any sacks. This is a big argument we've had with Chiefs fans over the years about his playoff stats, is people want to point at sacks, but you're ignoring the impact he makes in other areas, such as taking on double teams. You don't think the Jaguars are going to double team Chris Jones? They absolutely would. And that opens up things for other guys. In week 1 versus the Detroit Lions, I actually thought the defensive ends weren't bad. Mike Dana had a sack. Felix Anudike-Uzama was applying pressure. George Karlaftis was doing George Karlaftis things, batting down passes at the line of scrimmage. The defensive ends were not bad. But overall, as a unit, as a defensive line, the Chiefs maybe didn't get as much pressure as they would have if Chris Jones was there. If they only recorded 1 sack, that was from Mike Dana. With Chris Jones back in the fold, I'm just really excited to see what this pass rush looks with their centerpiece back. Like, this pass rush can only be as good as its potential would suggest if Chris Jones is there. And now he's back. So I really feel like his return cannot be overstated.
Oh, yeah. And now the only question that I have with Chris Jones coming back is he said that he was working out twice a day during the offseason, but no, he was not. Chris Jones was not working out twice a day. I think that it's going to take him some time to get back to being the level of player that Chris Jones was, just because he hasn't done anything all offseason. And there's a difference between being in shape and being in football shape. And so I think that that's why they might be on a bit of a snap count with Chris Jones in week 2. But like you said, he is the engine that helps the car run. And he's going to make it so much easier for your young defensive ends like Felix Anudike-Uzama and George Karlaftis to do their job when you've got a monster of a man in Chris Jones pushing the pocket forward from the middle, and it's going to just make it easier for those edges to get pressure. And so that's a great thing for this defensive line. And the defensive line, it's a trickle down effect to everything else on your defense. It's going to make it easier for your cornerbacks to cover. It's going to make it easier for your linebackers to cover, because when you're getting pressure really quickly, your quarterback, I guess the other quarterback, isn't going to have time to throw. So it's just going to make it a lot easier on your defense. And Josh, our defense was pretty good against the Lions, and you're only
Mhm.
adding one of the 5 best defensive players in football on your team.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see what that's like in week 2.
Yeah. You're adding a defensive player of the year candidate back to
Yeah.
your defense, and you held the Lions to 14 points in week 1. It's really it's gonna be awesome having him back, man. Like he can take this defense to another level. I thought the Kansas City Chiefs defense had potential to be top 10 this year, but that was with the premise that Chris Jones was going to be a part of this defensive unit. For a second there, it looked like he wasn't going to be, but now he's back. So more focusing on the impact of Chris Jones rejoining this defensive line. I saw this interesting tweet on Twitter yesterday. I'm going to put it up on the screen for you to look at, Michael. Then I'm also going to read it out to people listening. But this is highest. This is a tweet from at PFF Macri. This is PFF highest rate of cleanup and or unblocked pressures from last year. There were 3 Kansas City Chiefs that ranked in the top 10 of unblocked pressures. Okay. Those 3 were Carlos Dunlap, George Karlaftis, and Frank Clark. They all 3 ranked in the top 10 of clean or unblocked pressures, meaning that they were just being left unblocked, and that's why they were having an impact. You know why that is, Michael? Because there was a disruptive presence in Chris Jones in the middle of this defensive line. That's insane to have 3 players from your defensive line on this list, but we all know why they're there, and that's why when I tell people that Chris Jones is important and they can't repeat in 2023 without him, that is why. Like, those are some notable names that are up there that are just being left completely unblocked from last year.
Well, they do that with Frank Clark for other reasons, just because he's not worth
Yeah.
blocking. But
Yeah.
no, the other 2 being on there is kind of funny because I also saw, I think Cam Jordan was on there, which is like, how are you not blocking Cam Jordan? But
Yeah.
no, it speaks to the level of importance that Chris Jones brings to this football team and what he does to an opposing offensive line. And people always use sacks as the biggest metric when we should use pressures. And the amount of pressure that Chris Jones forces and, allows his teammates to force, it's that ripple effect. It's what he does and what he allows other people around him to do. It's just so valuable to this football team. And Jacksonville, I think they lost, or no, they beat the Colts last week, but they weren't really able to get to Trevor that much. So hopefully this week, the Chiefs can force more pressure with Chris Jones coming back and, get to Trevor early.
Yeah, and I think that the Chiefs pass rush also in the divisional round last year versus the Jaguars, they actually did a pretty good job. I
Yeah.
only expect them to be better. You mentioned how many pressures being super valuable, and Chris Jones basically leading in that statistic when it comes to anybody on the Chiefs. And I remember reading from Seth Kaiser on Twitter a few weeks ago that Chris Jones accounted for basically a quarter of the team's pressures last year, and the 2 closest guys behind him in pressures were Carlos Dunlap and Frank Clark. Now, with the tweet I just showed you, a lot of those were unblocked, but those guys are also no longer on the Chiefs anymore,
Yeah.
which just it emphasizes the importance of having Chris Jones back on this defensive line. And the Jaguars will be a good test for this defensive line because they have a decent offensive line. Now, they obviously lost Jawan Taylor, their starting right tackle, to us, the Kansas City Chiefs. But they still have, what's his name? I can't remember their other tackle's name, but they drafted Anton Harrison from Oklahoma in the draft. Another prospect that everybody liked. So they have a solid set of tackles on their team. And I'll be excited to see how this Chiefs defense matches up against their offensive line. And I still expect Spags to blitz as always, because no matter how good your front four is, Spags is always going to blitz because that's what he likes to do.
Yeah. And it's definitely, I think it's going to take some time for this defense to flourish and get into full, mid-season form. I don't expect that to happen in week 2, but they can also clean up the missed tackles. And I think that as long as we look at the defensive line individually apart from the rest of the defense and say, okay, they were able to force more pressure than they did against the Lions, and they were able to, just do that at a higher level. I think I'm going to come out of this game feeling a lot better about how the defense will be, 3-4 weeks from now than I did last week.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just excited to have Chris Jones back out there. I don't know how many times I can reiterate that. He's going to be absolutely massive for this defense versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, an offense that looked pretty good last week. We'll get into the preview a little bit later, though. I was trying to look up the name of that other Jaguars tackle that I cannot remember for some reason. I really should know his name, but I'm just drawing a complete blank. I'm going to look up their roster real quick. But while I'm doing that, Michael, I'll just ask your thoughts on. Okay, so Travis Kelce, we expect him to be back healthy for this game, right? Seems like he's going to play. I know he was also limited at practice, but I'd be surprised if he doesn't play at this point. But over the weekend, Jay Glazer, who works for Fox Sports, he does their NFL Sunday show for the pregame. He is an insider. He has a lot of scoops. He was the one last year that mentioned that Kelce was a game time decision with that back injury before the AFC Championship, I believe it was.
Yep.
He mentioned that the Chiefs had initially feared when Kelce got injured in practice last week that he suffered a tibia fracture and that he was going to be out for the season. It ended up not being that bad. It ended up being just a really deep bone bruise. But, man, I just got to say, had this team lost Travis Kelce for the season, that certainly would have given Chris Jones more leverage. Hard not to think about Chris Jones when thinking about losing Travis Kelce. But also, I cannot imagine this group of pass catchers without Travis Kelce. I'm just glad he's coming back. But I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that.
Well, no, I mentioned it, I think, last week on either Kingdom Crew or it might have been our post-game show that I was at the stadium for that week 1 game against the Lions, and I watched Travis Kelce specifically walking in. He was not walking like a normal person does. He was kind of hobbling and not really putting a lot of pressure on his knee. And I see that as the layperson and just ask myself, how could this guy ever play football a week from now? But whatever they're giving him in the locker room or the training facility, they better give it to everybody because it's a miracle that this guy is going to be good to go. But it speaks to the level of toughness and just attitude that Travis Kelce has, that he wants to get it back out there to play so quickly. But yeah, especially, a tight end in his 30s, when you hear a lower leg injury, you start to get scared. And so we got very blessed that it wasn't a season-ending injury because, like you said, I don't want to imagine a world without Travis Kelce right now, especially because there's so many young, unproven pass catchers. And not to stray away from the Travis Kelce debate, but I did want to kind of talk about, Kadarius Toney really quickly because I heard somebody make a point in a press conference, and it really made a lot of sense that we were so quick to jump on Kadarius Toney for dropping all those balls. He got injured, I think, less than 30 minutes into training camp, and he just was able to fight back and get back to play in week 1. And so we're judging him so harshly when he basically had no training camp and has not been practicing. So I do think that we have to cut Kadarius Toney a little bit of slack. And I thought that was so interesting because I kind of forgot that he didn't basically participate in training camp.
Yeah, he missed training camp, did not play in any of the preseason games, was basically thrown back into the fire. Now, most of his passes were wide open and really should have been caught. Like, you're an NFL player. Even if you miss training camp, I expect you to catch those passes. But there is reason to believe that he was kind of in his own head, and just once the drops start to pile up, that gets into your head. It's hard to get back into the game. And he didn't really get to practice with this team, and he didn't get to build up that chemistry with Mahomes during the offseason all that much. So, yeah, and here's the thing with Kadarius Toney. Like, I saw a lot of people just throwing in the towel on Kadarius Toney after that game, which is just kind of ridiculous to me. Like,
stupid.
I'm giving Kadarius Toney the benefit of the doubt because we've seen what he can do for this team. He is a very good player when he's healthy and he is on the field. He's electric with the ball in his hands. He can make people miss like no one I've ever seen. He's important to what this offense does. The Chiefs were banking on him competing for their wide receiver 1 role this year. I expect, in classic Andy Reid fashion, him to draw up a couple plays specifically for Kadarius Toney in this game against the Jaguars to get him back in it and get him feeling better. This is usually what Andy does when a guy messes up or has a bad game. He'll just keep on firing right to him, give him a chance to make it up. And I think that's what he's going to do with Toney in this game. Real quick, I do want to mention Cam Robinson was the other Jaguars tackle I could not think of. Went to college at Alabama. Although he's suspended for the first 4 games of the season, so he's not going to be playing in this one. So I don't know who they're actually going to have starting a tackle. I know they have Walker Little on their depth chart, the tackle they took out of the draft from Stanford a couple years
Man,
ago.
I
So
remember scouting that guy. That's crazy.
yeah, so I don't know if it's going to be him or somebody else. But yeah, Cam Robinson, I don't believe will be playing in this game. Anton Harrison will be playing at which tackle spot. We'll see what they do there. But yeah, also interesting. On the Jaguars roster, they have Darrell Williams, the former Chiefs center, not the running back, the center that the Chiefs carried for many years. I found that to be a little bit interesting. I don't think he'll be playing in this game, but I just thought it was interesting that they have him on their team, maybe to share a little bit of insight on their opponent. But yeah, usually that doesn't work out for the teams that try to do that. It kind of backfired on the Bengals when they did it with, Chris Lamons,
Yeah.
and they picked him up to try and get him to leak the playbook to the Chiefs or whatever, and then they lost that game, and then Lamons was not given the opportunity to rejoin the Chiefs for the Super Bowl. So screw the Bengals
Yeah.
for that. That
Yeah,
was
that really sucks. That sucks for Chris Lamons, but he's got his own stuff going on off the
yeah,
field. So.
yeah. He's got other stuff going on for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to get your take on the whole thing going on with Travis Kelce. I'm just glad that he's healthy, man, because we got a glimpse into what life after Travis Kelce is going to look like once he's gone. And it was scary. And I think we learned that the Chiefs, as currently constructed, are not ready for that.
Yeah.
But it also echoes that long-term concern that we talked about, that you cannot be relying on Travis Kelce like this when he's already about to be 34 years old. It was always going to be silly to keep using him the way they do. Like, yes, Travis Kelce is going to be important to this football team as long as he's here, and he's going to get a lot of usage. I understand that, but this is why so many people were clamoring for a veteran wide receiver. It's like, we got to give Travis Kelce a break. We got to give him a breather. Have somebody else on this roster that Patrick Mahomes feels like he can go to on third down or in critical moments. As much as it's nice throwing to Travis Kelce in those moments, you got to give him some sort of a breather, especially in the regular season, so he can be there for the long haul in the playoffs. So we won't spend too long on this, but like, I've already seen some like trade hypotheticals that Chiefs fans have thrown out. One is for Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have not been able to come to a contract extension with Mike Evans. So he could be a trade deadline candidate, and he doesn't seem to really be in their future plans. He's getting older. I don't know if that's realistic. One, because the Chiefs don't really have any cap space right now, even with the Joe Tooney restructure. It's just going to be hard to fit anybody under their cap right now. And if Mike Evans wants an extension, I really don't see him getting it from the Chiefs either. So that's another thing you have to think about. I am in agreement with Chiefs fans that this team should add a veteran wide receiver. Like, I will not say no to the idea. But me and you talked about this in the post game after the loss to the Detroit Lions. This is a young wide receiver group.
Yeah.
They probably won't be as bad all season as they were in game one. So they'll make people feel better as time goes on. But I'm not against adding a veteran wide receiver. Mike Evans is a name that has been thrown out there. I just wondered what you thought about him. I was dreaming about it a little bit, though, just because he also has had 1,000 yards receiving every single year he's been in the league. And Travis Kelce is on that insane 1,000-yard receiving streak. And I just think it would be awesome to have two guys who I think are basically neck and neck for longest active 1,000-yard receiving streak on the same team.
We don't pay Chris Jones, so why would we pay Mike Evans? So I don't think that's not going to happen. And the Chiefs would definitely not give up the assets needed to acquire Mike Evans for a 1-year rental. So that's not going to happen. Hate to burst any Chiefs fans' bubbles. That's just not going to happen. But you could definitely pick up a veteran wide receiver. I don't really know what the market's like right now, but I would also argue. Go ahead.
It's a little early to tell. I was just going to say that.
But also the Chiefs took 7 wide receivers out of camp. If you don't have anybody out of those 7 wide receivers that can step up and make, production for this offense, you might have a bigger problem on your hands than just adding a veteran wide receiver. So I'm of the mindset that we just got to ride it out with these young kids and just hope that they can produce, because you're all in right now. You took 7 wide receivers. I don't even remember the last time the Chiefs did that. And so
I've never done it, not since Andy Reid has been here.
Clearly that they have, belief that these guys can do the job. And I'm not ready to come off of that after 1 week. I know a lot of Chiefs fans were freaking out that, oh, this is what it's going to be like all season long, yada, yada, yada. But it's 1 week. Did you see the Bengals in week 1? Did you see the Bills in week 1? It's week 1, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be fine. God, that
Yeah,
Bills game was so bad.
It was entertaining to watch, though. And Josh Allen, man, turnover machine. He just continues to throw interceptions and fumble the ball away for his team. But that's another topic of conversation. No, I'm glad you brought up the 7 wide receivers thing, because if this team did acquire another wide receiver, who are you bumping off? You're not getting rid of Rashee Rice. You're not getting rid of Sky Moore. Justin Watson's here to stay. This team has invested too much in Justin Ross being on the roster. Like, who are you bumping off? Maybe like Richie James. And the only reason I say that is because he had pretty much zero role in the team's first game. And it's like, if we're in week 8 or whatever, and Richie James still is just not seeing the field, then okay, like I could understand that. But yeah, it's like, who are you bumping off when you're already carrying 7 wide receivers?
The only guy I could think about would be Justin Ross. Justin Ross really be the only one that made sense.
They didn't really use him either, so
yeah. So I don't think they're going to trade for anybody. This is who their wide receiver core is. They're going to go to the very end with these guys. And I really do think that they'll be okay, because all offseason long we were worried about it. But then we got to that point in the preseason where we're like, okay, we might have some dogs here. And, week 1 kind of ruined all of that. But the changing of emotion between weeks of, okay, we got something, to, oh, wow, we all suck. It's kind of crazy. So I think we got to kind of relax, give it some time. I think week 2 will kind of surprise a lot of people, and we'll see different guys step up. You made a really good point. They're definitely going to try to get Kadarius Toney involved just to get his confidence level back up, because right now it's definitely in the gutter. But I do think that they're going to get other guys involved, and don't expect this offense to stall, because you're also getting Travis Kelce back. So the offense is just going to function a lot better, because kind of what Chris Jones does for the defense in applying pressure and forcing double teams. When Travis Kelce's on the football field, every defensive back and linebacker is like, okay, what is Travis Kelce going to do in space? And that kind of, brings people over to him. And that's going to allow a guy like Kadarius Toney or Richie James or even Rashee Rice to have more space to work. And so that's why I think that Travis Kelce coming back to this team is so big, because even if he's not catching passes, he's so physically scary on the football field that, they're going to allow him to be, other guys to flourish.
Yeah, and since I've had time to think about it, I feel like a lot of people are also just kind of failing to acknowledge the fact that this team had to change the entire game plan less than 2 days before the game versus the Detroit Lions, because Kelce went down. And Travis Kelce is always going to be a huge part of the game plan as long as he's on the Chiefs. And when you take him away just 2 days before the game, like, that throws a monkey wrench into things. And guys that you weren't planning on being involved at all now have to get involved just out of necessity. And it also just it changes a lot of things, because Kelce not being there means there's no doubling Kelce. There's nobody bracketing Kelce. There's not many other guys on the Chiefs besides Kelce that are earning double teams from the defense. So with him not being there, the Lions were kind of able to clamp up these wide receivers. And Travis Kelce, similar to Chris Jones on the defensive line, just opens up a lot of things for everybody else. He's one of the most uncoverable guys in the league. You always see teams try to constantly double team him, and then it just doesn't matter because Kelce's that good. Whether it's zone coverage, man coverage, Kelce's beating it either way. He's one of the best route runners at his position, or one of the best route runners in NFL history that we've seen. So Travis Kelce is that guy, and when he's not there, it just makes things harder for everyone else. So I will look for the wide receivers to have a bounce back game with Travis Kelce now playing alongside them.
Absolutely. I'm of that mindset too, because Travis Kelce, like we both said, is just, he's the Chris Jones of the offense. He opens everything up. He opens the entire field up. And I'm just excited to have that guy back. Quick little side note. The NFL post stuff, going back in history, and they showed a game where Tyreek Hill went for 203 in the first quarter against the Bucks. And I was just like, oh my gosh, Tyreek Hill's talent aside, the amount of space that he had, because the Bucks DBs were just scared out of their minds of Travis Kelce. It's kind of crazy that we had both those guys on the field at the same time. And I mean, we won a Super Bowl without Tyreek Hill, so obviously we were okay. But those guys on the field together, if I was a defensive coordinator for an opposing team, I'd give up. There's not much you can do.
Yeah, watching Tyreek against the Chargers this weekend, killing the Chargers as he's used to from being on the Chiefs for all those years, made me miss him a little bit. Like, yes, we're fine without him, but man, I miss having that guy on my team.
Then he opens his mouth and you're like, okay, I'm glad you're gone. That's just kind of how it is.
I don't know. Like, to me, that stuff is just like players will talk, but when it's all said and done and Tyreek looks back, he'll always be fondest of his days on the Chiefs instead of the Dolphins. I firmly believe that. You know, fans will say what they'll say, and Tyreek is going to get into it with some fans, I'm sure. And people are going to be like, I don't care for Tyreek anymore. I will always love and appreciate that man for what he did. And he helped bring us to our first. Definitely see him coming back and retire once his career in Miami is over. But Michael, you still there? You froze up on me for just a second.
You froze up on me too, but okay. I heard what you said. He could definitely come. Okay. He could come back, but like at the same time, I don't know what's going through Tyreek Hill's head.
Because he also said he might. Yeah, because he also said he might retire after this Dolphins contract.
Yeah,
that was something he said over the offseason.
He says a lot of stuff, and so I'm kind of glad. Kind of like Chris Jones, he's back, so we don't have to listen to him talk anymore. Tyreek Hill's gone, so we don't really have to listen to him talk anymore. But I love Tyreek Hill. I'll always love him, but man, sometimes when he speaks, it's like I really don't want to listen to you right now.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of my point. It's just he talks. It's whatever. Like that's Tyreek. That's who he is. But I'm cool with it. So let's get into breaking down this preview. Jaguars versus Chiefs. I'm going to come out and say it right now that this is a must-win game for the Chiefs. And I know people are probably going to be like, well, it must win. Like it's only week 2. Yeah, but you don't want to start out 0-2. Okay? Like starting at 0-2, it's not good. So I say this is a must-win game for the Chiefs. This is a team you beat last year in the playoffs. This is a team that's probably going to be in the playoff picture later this year. You got to go out and make a statement and beat them, especially after that performance from last Thursday night. Like you got to come out and make a statement against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence was 24 of 32 for 241 yards and 2 touchdowns, 1 interception versus the Colts. We know what he can do. He looked like he might be a bust there being coached under Urban Meyer, but of course they got a real football coach in there in Doug Peterson, and he's kind of turned him around to being in some people's top 5 discussions. Trevor Lawrence is good enough to beat the Chiefs on the right day. That's for certain. The Jaguars are just loaded at the skill positions, though. That's kind of what I wanted to point out, and that's where I think this matchup could get difficult for the Chiefs. So they have a nice little trio with Travis Etienne, Calvin Ridley, and then Christian Kirk. So Calvin Ridley was awesome in their first game. He had 8 catches for 101 yards and touchdown. Travis Etienne averaged 4.3 yards per carry. And they did that, and Christian Kirk had 1 catch for 9 yards, and they still beat the Colts handily. And Christian Kirk was a guy that the Chiefs struggled to cover in both the playoffs and the regular season game from last year. That was one of the matchups that L'Jarius Sneed really struggled in because Christian Kirk is one of those quicker, shiftier slot receivers that just gives him trouble because that's one of L'Jarius Sneed's shortcomings. That's his short area quickness. I would like to see a guy like Trent McDuffie on Christian Kirk for this game because he's a little bit more sticky in coverage than even Sneed is, and I think he has more success against the speedier slot guys. And then I would like to see Sneed stick on Calvin Ridley. But then the other thing I'm worried about, because the Chiefs have covered to struggle the tight end position for a long time, Evan Ingram has become a really nice player for the Jacksonville Jaguars, has had a nice little career resurgence over there. He had some nice catches last game for them against the Colts. He had 5 catches for 49 yards. Like I said, the skill positions are looking pretty loaded for the Jaguars, and that's an area of this Jaguars team that worries me in this matchup against the Chiefs. I like the Chiefs defense. This is another reason, though, why I'm really glad that they're getting Chris Jones back because they're going to need all hands on deck versus this Jaguars offensive attack.
Oh, yeah. The Jaguars offense is really good. And you mentioned that trio. Calvin Ridley, I kind of forgot that Calvin Ridley was on the Jacksonville Jaguars because he got busted for gambling and all that kind of stuff. But Calvin Ridley's legit guys. He's that guy. And to come back in your first game in over a year and to put up those numbers, it just shows you how good he actually is. So the Chiefs defense is going to be tested, and it's going to start from the front all the way to the back, because if our defensive line can force that pressure on Trevor Lawrence, it's going to make it easier for your defensive backs like Snead and McDuffie and some of the younger guys like Joshua Williams. And I always get it. Is it Jalen Watson?
Yeah.
Okay, we have so many Justins and Jalen's and Watsons specifically, so I get confused. But yeah, it's going to make it difficult for those guys to cover if your defensive line can't get any pressure. So definitely get to the quarterback early and apply pressure. It doesn't have to necessarily be sacks, but get to him early. And I like what you said. I think you got to put McDuffie on the speedier guy in Christian Kirk and let your more, advanced corner in Snead take on Ridley. I think that's probably a good thing. Who covers Ingram? Maybe that's a Justin Reed thing, but you're going to have to get creative and make sure you isolate those guys. But I do think this defense can stop the Jaguars offense, or at least contain it enough to where our offense can put up, more points than theirs.
Yeah, Chamari Connor, too, is a guy in the secondary I kind of expect to see a lot of. He started, I believe, their game against Detroit. Spags really likes him. One of his strengths coming out of college was covering tight ends. I could see him definitely splitting reps with like Justin Reed covering Evan Ingram. I didn't even mention Zay Jones, who the Jaguars have, who's a solid receiver. Like I said, they got a lot of guys they can go to. One area in which I'm looking, so Drew Tranquil, the big linebacker addition from this past offseason, only played in, I think, 13 snaps versus the Detroit Lions. I would hope to see an uptick in those snaps against the Jaguars because they have Travis Etienne and Jamal Agnew, who they utilize a lot out of the backfield as receivers and, of course, in the running game. So I would like to see Drew Tranquil out there covering those guys out of the backfield. He's your best coverage linebacker. You didn't play him that much against the Detroit Lions, even though they have a pretty good running back group with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. I think Drew Tranquil needs more snaps, and they need to come against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I love Nick Bolton. I love Willie Gay, but Drew Tranquil is your best coverage linebacker, and Doug Peterson's a good coach. I expect him to attack that weakness if they have those guys out there over Drew Tranquil.
Yeah, I'm interested to see the coaching battle too, because, Doug Peterson's a protege of Andy Reid, and they've faced each other a lot in the past couple of years. So I almost wonder if you're going to go back and watch game tape from the playoff game or last year's game to get, a better feeling for what this offense is going to do. It's almost like, how is Andy Reid going to continually reinvent himself against a guy that knows him so well? But, the success rate that Andy Reid has had against Doug Peterson is very encouraging. But we also know that Doug Peterson is a good coach with a very young football team. But I do think that Andy Reid's going to have to out-scheme him again, especially with some of your deficiencies, because I would say that the Jaguars have a better wide receiver core, but they don't have the tight end and a QB like the Chiefs do. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Chiefs handle that. Hopefully Pacheco can be better on the ground for the Chiefs. Like, I don't want to switch to the offense quite yet, but our running backs were pretty bad last week outside of the wide receivers. So I just hope that our offense can do a better job, because our defense, I really have no complaints. We didn't really see anything against the Lions that made me say, okay, this defense sucks outside of the missed tackles. But in a week 1 game, I expected that.
Yeah. Well, so to bring it back over to Doug Peterson, I expect him to try a lot of things. He likes to go for it on 4th down. He also opened last year's regular season game with an onside kick. I would be looking out for that if the Jaguars are kicking the ball at all. I would just make sure of it, Andy, because they did it to you last year. Look out for Doug Peterson trying some stuff. He just does. That's kind of his mantra. He did it with the Eagles when he was there too. He likes to go for it. He kind of changed. Doug Peterson was kind of the leader of the change of coaches going for it on 4th down all the time now. It was kind of something before where coaches just really didn't mess with it, but Doug Peterson kind of popularized going for it on 4th down, and I don't expect that to stop now.
No, he's going to be aggressive, and hopefully Andy Reid takes a page out of his book and is also aggressive on 3rd and 4th down and puts the ball in the best player in the world's hands, hopefully.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would hope that we get more aggressive on offense, and this coaching battle is going to be really fun to watch.
Yeah, I think if you're holding the Jaguars under 30 points, you should be able to win this game. Would I like it to be even lower than that? Sure, but like 30 points is kind of my that's kind of my limit just because they won 31-21 in their last game versus the Colts. So I think if you hold them below 30 points, that you should have a good chance of winning this game. And I expect the offense to come out firing and make a statement, man, to kind of bring it over to the offense because I don't have too much else to say about the defense, but the offense needs to go out there and make a statement. And you're getting Travis Kelce back. These receivers, I'm sure, are wanting to get back out there and redeem themselves. You mentioned Andy Reid needed to take a page out of Doug Peterson's playbook, and I agree. But also, when he does go for it on fourth down, if he does that at all, let's keep it simple, Andy. Like, give the ball to your best running back with like an extra lineman in there and just try to jam it up their throats. Like, everyone else in the league does it. Why can't you? Like, we don't need any of these Rashee Rice end arounds or a handoff to Sky Moore or anything crazy like that because it just doesn't work, man. Like, you're overcomplicating it. Teams like even like with the whole like even if you're gonna sneak it, do it with Patrick Mahomes. Like, I'm tired of being
Never
scared of
happened.
that injury from years ago. Like, it's just like Blake Bell going in there and trying to take the snap from under center. Like, everyone, you're not fooling anybody. You're just not.
No. If we ever see Patrick Mahomes QB sneak it again, it might be the most surprising play of his career because we simply have not seen it. I
Yeah.
thought maybe in a couple Super Bowls they'd bring it out. No, they did. No, 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 no. So
Not
I
even
have
in
a
a
hard,
Super Bowl.
yeah, which is like, why? Like in a Super Bowl where literally you could tear an ACL, but you're in the biggest game of the year, and I guess I'm not trying to advocate for tearing your ACL, but like, God forbid something crazy happens. You're in the biggest game of your life. So you kind of get a pass for that. But it's also statistically the best, most effective play to run. It also is a pretty safe play. It was a freak injury that happened a long time ago, and Andy Reid's never going to forget it. And so we kind of have to forget about the possibility of him ever using it. But to kind of bring it back, they've got to get smarter about going forward on third and fourth down. Like you said, give it to your best running back. Let him get the yard. You're not fooling anybody with Blake Bell. And so since you're not fooling anybody with Blake Bell, you might as well bring in an extra guy to, push the pile behind him because the Chiefs are so predictable on those third and fourth downs that you almost have to supplement that with a guy that can help you move the needle because it is so predictable.
For sure. I would love to see the passing game be much more of a factor in this one than it was against Detroit. Last year, the Jacksonville Jaguars allowed over 230 pass yards per game. Patrick Mahomes is averaging like 300 passing yards a game for his career. I expect him to go out there and expose the Jaguars in coverage. I don't know enough about the Jaguars. We haven't seen him enough this year to say that their pass defense is improved at all. But I do know from last year that their pass defense wasn't all that great. So I expect Mahomes to go out there and feed these receivers, give them a chance to redeem themselves. Kadarius Toney's one we already talked about. I expect Rashee Rice to get some big plays. But if there's a guy that I'm hoping to see, it's Sky Moore. He was one of the players I was extremely disappointed in week one. And I'm starting to lose confidence in the idea that Sky Moore is an NFL caliber wide receiver. So, what better way to prove me wrong than go out there against one of the weaker pass defenses from last year with Travis Kelce being back and doing something? Like, I want and I need to see Sky Moore do something in this game.
Yeah, Sky Moore, it's definitely not the end all be all if he doesn't perform in week 2, but what are you waiting for? Like, you're getting the opportunities, you're just not capitalizing on them. And it's kind of disappointing that the Chiefs spent such a high resource on Sky Moore when they could have drafted George Pickens or somebody else. But when you got Rashee Rice leapfrogging you, you almost got to wonder to yourself, am I good enough kind of thing? Because Rashee Rice was a second-round draft pick in this past draft, and the way that Andy Reid utilizes wide receivers, it's not going to happen in year one. But is it because Rashee Rice is so good at football, or is it because Sky Moore is just that bad at football? So I hope that's not the case for Sky Moore, but if you're ever going to produce, this would probably be the week to do it.
Yeah, like we need to see it at some point from him.
Yeah.
Week 2 into your second year in the league, people are already having questions about you, that's not a great sign. And so
No.
you really need this game to be productive. And I'm not even asking for 100 yards from the guy. I'm just wanting to see maybe a few catches for 50 something yards in the touchdown. Just getting involved. Like, I'm not asking for too much from Sky Moore. I just want to see reason from him for me to be optimistic moving forward that he's going to be a wide receiver that's very important to this team, or just like a factor in this offense. Because so
Yeah.
far I haven't seen that. The only time I've seen him produce is when everyone else has went down.
Yeah. When realistically, I have that thought for all the wide receivers. After last week, I want to see everybody step up and at least show us something, because I think the wide receiver core left a lot to be desired after last week's loss. So I hope this is the bounce back game. It better be the bounce back game because, like you said, this is a must win game. You can't mess around, especially against an AFC team that come 15 weeks down the line could be the difference between a number 1 seed or a number 2 seed. These kind of games are important. It might not seem like it right away, but time will show that these AFC games really do mean something. So you definitely have got to come out, make a statement. I hope this is kind of like what happened last year when the Chiefs lost to the Colts. They came out the next week against the 49ers and blew the doors off of them. I hope that's
Yeah.
the case. But you don't even have to blow the doors off of them. Just come out, win the game, look good on offense. Your defense does their job, and I'll be happy. You just can't start 0-2 to start your 2023 campaign.
I would like to see a double digit win. I know the Jaguars are a good team, but it's a team that they beat by double digits last year in the regular season. I think they would have beat them by double digits had Patrick Mahomes not gotten injured in the playoffs. I think with the moves that the Chiefs made in the offseason, that they should be able to establish the fact clearly that they're a better team than the Jaguars in this one in week 2. I want to see it. You mentioned the running game, how it was kind of ineffective against the Detroit Lions. None of the running backs really separated themselves. The offensive line looked rather mortal versus the Detroit Lions, for lack of a better term, especially on that one. Was it third or fourth down? The sweep to Rashee Rice. Was that a third or fourth down? I think that was a third down.
I think it was
Because I
third
think
down.
yeah. It was a third down, and then they decided not to go for it on fourth down. Because I remember you saying in the last post game that,
Yeah.
oh, why wouldn't you go for it there, but you would go for it on 4th and 25.
Because it was like
I
4th
remember.
and 3. It was like it was manageable.
Yeah. I think it was even shorter than that,
Might
but
have been.
maybe not. Maybe not after the tackle for a loss. I don't remember, but nonetheless, this team, this offensive line is way too good, and Isaiah Pacheco is way too good. Jerick McKinnon's an option you have to. Don't really care for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I don't need to make that any more obvious, but
Ditto.
this rushing attack should be way better than it is sometimes. And I don't want to say it's because Andy Reid goes away from the run, because I mean, yes, Andy Reid sometimes likes to abandon the run. I get that. But there's a lot of other times too where Andy Reid does run the ball and the Chiefs just aren't good at it. And
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to find or figure out sometimes. Because like even against the Bengals in both the AFC Championship game and in the regular season last year, the Chiefs struggled to run the ball. Now the Bengals do have a really good defensive line, but it's like Isaiah Pacheco just was they got nothing in the run game against the Bengals last year. And it's like your offensive line's way too good to be this incompetent in the run game sometimes.
Yeah. It's almost like I don't want to blame our running backs because they've got talent. It's just sometimes we just don't see it where we expect to see it. So you better do a better job running the ball, and hopefully they don't give Clyde any carries. I think that's growth. Once you see that, the guy that's getting 6-7 carries a game and only giving you 10, 12 yards, probably not the best guy to have carrying the football. I hope it's just McKinnon and Pacheco, but even then, like I don't expect this team to run the ball a lot, but I do expect them when they do run the ball to get more than like 2.5 yards a carry. Like, you're going to have to do
Yeah.
better than that.
Yeah, Mahomes can't be your leading rusher again.
No. Because he only had like 45 yards. It wasn't like he rushed for 115. Like it wasn't. It was a mediocre number, but your running backs were so bad that he was your leading rusher.
Yeah, that was the case too many times last year as well. I mean, yeah, there's going to be some games where Mahomes ends up being your leading rusher. That's fine, whatever. But your running backs need to be taking over. So I have my concerns with the offense, but I expect them to have a bounce back statement game. I expect this to be a double-digit win. I don't have too much more to say for this preview, unless there's anything else that you want to add, Michael. I say we go ahead and make our score predictions.
I was just about to say, let's get into the score predictions.
Okay, so I'm going to say 31-24. The Chiefs win this one. Or 31-21, sorry. Because I said I wanted it to be a double-digit win. I'm going to pick the Jaguars to lose by the same score they won against the Colts last week. I think this defense with Chris Jones being back, this defense is going to be fired up. They're going to hold the Jaguars to just 21 points. And then again, I expect the Chiefs to go out there and have a statement game. Mahomes to throw for over 300 yards and a few touchdowns. So, yeah.
Our final scores
Convincing
are
win.
very similar. Very similar. I have Chiefs winning 34-24, so about a 3-point
Okay.
difference. I do think they win by double digits. It's a game that they probably coast in the fourth quarter. Like, they're going to win the game, but maybe the Jacksonville Jaguars make it close in the fourth quarter. So
Sure.
I think the Chiefs win 34-24, but I will say I would not be surprised if the Chiefs drop 40. I would not be. That's just
Wow, really?
I have the weird feeling that they are so pissed off after last week that Andy Reid might just say, okay, let's cut them loose and let's just see what we can do. And I would not be shocked if they drop 40. I'm not predicting them to drop 40, but I would not be, completely floored if the Chiefs came out and, dropped 40, had like over 500 yards of total offense. Travis Kelce gets a touchdown. Other guys get in the mix, maybe a Justin Ross touchdown. I would definitely not be surprised if they drop 40.
That's surprising. But I would like to see it. Now, okay, I want to bring up one more stat before we go ahead and wrap this up. So, someone's emailed this to me, this statistic, and it's the history of teams to start off 0-2. Now, I don't want to scare anyone, make it seem like the Chiefs aren't going to make the playoffs or something like that if they start 0-2, but there's a reason you don't want to be starting 0-2. So, of teams to start 0-2 all time in NFL history, 57 or 14% of them have gone on to have a winning season. Only 9.6% have gone on to make the playoffs. 1% have gone on to make the Super Bowl, and less than 1% have ended up winning the Super Bowl. So, do I think the Chiefs season is over if they start off 0-2? Definitely not. But the odds are definitely not in their favor. So, it's just something that I would like to stay away from.
Don't dig yourself in a hole if you don't have to. That's really what it is. And the teams that start off 0-2, I wouldn't be surprised if by week 5 or 6 they're 2-4. And at that point, it's really hard to dig out of that kind of hole because the Chiefs have had a really good track history of winning 7, 8 out of their first 9, or even better than that. And that really puts you in a very advantageous position. Big vocabulary word for the day. Puts you in a good position to capitalize and get a high seed in the playoff picture. So, you don't want to start off 0-2, and that would not be good for this team. But I also think that, the Chiefs know what they're up against. And I trust Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, and Travis Kelce, now with Chris Jones coming back, to find a way to get the job done.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So, with that being said, we will wrap it up. So, you guys got our score predictions. We're picking the Chiefs to win again. Hopefully, we're correct this time because we were not correct last week. Michael and I are 0-1 so far on our season predictions. But, yeah. So let's hope for a win, man. The Chiefs need it. I don't want to scare anyone with that statistic, but I do not want to see this team start 0-2. It's not good, especially because their schedule is kind of challenging here at this first stretch of the season. So, Michael, with all that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap up, but why don't you let everyone know where they can find you?
You guys can find me on YouTube at KC Sports Report, social media, the Instagram and Twitter, the personals at the Michael Darcy. Check out my stuff on Bleacher Report. It's on the Bleacher Report mobile app under the Kansas City Chiefs. It's also on YouTube, so just go to my YouTube page and you can watch the Bleacher Report live streams on my YouTube page. It was great to be back. I've been suffering from COVID the last couple of days, so basically been in hibernation mode, but it's good to come out of my shell, come out of my cave, so to speak, and talk Chiefs football. And I'm excited to watch this game on Sunday.
Sounds good. So I'll have all that linked in the description, as well as the link to listen to this podcast on Spotify and all those other platforms. That'll be in the description. We appreciate you all tuning in to Kingdom Crew. We will be back next week to preview the Chiefs Week 3 game and talk about everything else that's happened Thank you all for stopping by, tuning in. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe so more Chiefs fans can find this. You can check out my work on showmefootball.com and arrowheadaddict.com. We will see you all in the next one. Go Chiefs.